Hello, welcome back to another Roots Up podcast. I'm Ryan Moletsky with you today. Joining me are Johnny Freedom and Northern Tim. We have a very exciting episode coming up on the Roots Up podcast and some quick housekeeping. If you're searching for our podcast, make sure if you're on iTunes, you go to the Soccer Down Here iTunes page, and our podcast is under there. We have all of our episodes there, along with Soccer Down Here's daily show with Jason Longshore and John Nelson, and all of their other content talking about the women's game, the domestic game on the USL level, USL League One level, and MLS, and then their overseas podcast. They have many different exciting shows, so make sure you're listening to them on Soccer Down Here. Also, our shows, if you do not have iTunes, are on the Soccer Down Here speaker page. You can go to soccerdownhere.net or download their app on Google Play and iTunes. That is, again, Soccer Down Here. While you're at it, we invite you to follow us on Roots Up Pod on Twitter. And while you're at it, make sure you're following Soccer Down Here on Twitter. Tonight's episode will be very exciting. We're going to discuss many things. Along those will be, we had a Twitter thread where we talked about which NPSL teams we would like to see go professional. We're going to dive into that. Then after that, we're going to talk about the U.S. Open Cup first-round pairings that were announced this week. Reminder that next week, the NPSL potential second-round pairings will be announced. We'll discuss those in next week's weekly Roots Up podcast episode. After those two things, we'll talk about how stadiums, and talk about which stadiums are successful, what makes a successful stadium in lower divisions, and what aspects of a stadium are important when picking out a venue for lower division teams in America in this day and age. Make sure to follow us along on Twitter. Once again, on our personals, I am at Riley Moletsky. Make sure following Johnny Freedom 73 and Tim Reporting. Kaiser is not on this episode with us, but you can follow him as well at Kaiser Stallings on Twitter. So we had a long Twitter thread and conversation the other day talking about what NPSL teams you want to see go professional, and there was a lot of response from you guys. Thank you so much for responding to the question. If you're not following us on Twitter, make sure you're following us at Roots Up Pod. Lots of interesting discussions throughout the week in between podcasts, and of course all the podcast news. But some teams that came up pretty frequently throughout the discussion were Minneapolis City, obviously, Asheville City SC, Little Rock Rangers, FC Wichita, AFC Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, Tulsa, Fort Worth, Vaqueros, FC Buffalo, Hartford City, Motown, Cleveland, Columbus, Baltimore, Duluth, Laredo, Kingston Stockade, and El Felito in California, if you're not familiar with them. And then PDX also came up a few times. But Johnny, of course, you're involved with FC Wichita and the Heartland Conference. What teams do you think should go professional, and what teams would you like to see go professional? What are your top five?
Well, I mean, man, again, hamstringing us again, Riley. We know when we were talking about, our favorite logos on the last pod and our five worst, it's hard to knock down five teams that we want to see go pro, because I think there's like 15 teams that I want to see go pro. But what I kind of looked at and really sat down and spent some time on is the first thing that I looked at is that, the NPSL, whether they can call it NPSL Pro, whether they're going to call it NPSL 1, this Founders Cup has a well-established Western Conference, and it looks like an Eastern Conference. We've got, ASC San Diego, Cal FC, FC Arizona, Napa Valley, the Roots over in the West, and in the East, we've got Chatta, Detroit, a couple Miami teams, Milwaukee, and then rounding up with the Cosmos. So I thought, what would be a good way? Because I want this professional league in the NPSL to be successful. And so I thought, there's some teams missing from the Midwest. And so I want to talk about that. But they also need something I think they needed an extra boost in the Northeast. So that starts me off with my first pick, which is the Kingston Stockade. I like Kingston for a lot of different reasons. I like their social media presence. I love their crest, a killer crest. But one of the things that a lot of people don't know about Kingston that I did and found out a little bit about my research, and it really made me super excited for them, is that there's a Kingston Stockade district, and it's within walking distance of the stadium, and there's bars and restaurants and different things in there. So it's for a supporter perspective and for a fan perspective. You go downtown, you support the local economy, get something to eat, get something to drink, And then, supporters can march over, chant, sing all their way over to the stadium for the match. They play at Dietz Stadium, which has a 1,500 fan capacity, which is a good capacity for an NPSL 1 or an NPSL Pro level club. They were conference champions in 2017, although they weren't successful in 2018. They only had 3 wins. They were decent, and they've got a motivated owner. Dennis Crowley is motivated about the club. It runs as a nonprofit. It's super interesting. And I love their social media. I love their website. They were releasing new kits in May and announcing that to the fans in May. Their new kits are ridiculous looking. It's a map of the area around Dietz Stadium. They would be, I think, the Kingston Stockade would be a great addition and give the East a real boost. And so, the rest of the teams that I'm kind of looking at, I think would be great additions to the Midwest. I think they're within great traveling distance of teams within the Midwest, and as well as they could reach some of the Eastern teams could reach out to them. The first team I would bring up obviously would be Minneapolis City, and I know some other fans were talking about that. Minneapolis City has done a really great job social media with their social media presence. Their merchandise is fantastic. The Crows are just have a great online presence. I love the ownership there. That the ownership is based on a mission. The mission was whether it's going to work or not at a pro level, but it's to provide opportunities for local Minneapolis players. And Tim and I have talked about this, whether or not that would work at a pro level is kind of up in the air when they start playing pro teams with players that represent all kinds of countries and different parts of America. It might be difficult, but I like the idea behind it, and I think it's fantastic. They have an established pitch. They play at Augsburg University, so that's not an issue. And finally, they're proven winners. I think they went 10. I think they had 10 wins last year, undefeated, 4 draws. I know, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong. So there's, obviously they're going to have a rampant fan base because fans like winners, and Minneapolis City are definitely winners. And so for that reason, I'd like to see them go pro. The remainder of the clubs are kind of around my area. And so that brings me to my number 3 pick, which would be Little Rock Ranger. Little Rock Ranger has established clubs close by. They've got stadium options. I don't know. I wish Ryan was on here. I was going to ask him. Everything indicates that they were going to be at War Memorial, but yet when the group of us were chatting online, it appears that when War Memorial did their revamp, the stadium or the pitch wasn't big enough. So I don't know. I'm confused about where they're playing, but I know that there are stadium options for Little Rock.
Clarification on that, when I was talking to him earlier, he said that the Open Cup has different rules than NPSL about how large the field is. So they're playing at War Memorial for the NPSL season, but for Open Cup play, they're playing at a local college field. It's a little bit bigger. But also they said that next year War Memorial is going to be expanded, the field sizes, so they can play both Open Cup and NPSL season.
It's perfect. And if you've ever been to War Memorial Stadium, it's amazing. The first year that Little Rock jumped into our conference, I call all the away games for FC Wichita the first year because there were no teams had any broadcasts, and we wanted to do that for our fans. War Memorial was amazing, an amazing stadium. And so I'm glad to hear that. I think Little Rock, as far as a market is concerned, is a fantastic market. Little Rock has done a wonderful job of really engaging their fans. They have anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 fans at every game, and there's really no other soccer competition in the area. So it's great. They have the Red Watch. They have supporters. They've got a rabid fan base. Jonathan Wardlaw is the owner. He's motivated. They're a competitive club. They're coming off of the conference championship season. They're in the U.S. Open Cup. And then the other thing they've had is a consistent manager, Will Montgomery. They haven't bounced around managers. He's been their manager since the beginning. And so for that reason, I think Little Rock would be an amazing NPSL club to become a pro club. My next pick is one of the many teams owned by Michael Hitchcock, and that is the Fort Worth Vaqueros. Nobody can argue Dallas-Fort Worth area is a massive market. They can support a lot of soccer in that area. And with the big Hispanic community in Texas, they love their soccer down there. And Dallas loves soccer, and I think Fort Worth does as well. And I'll go back to the owner. They've got a solid owner, Michael Hitchcock, who worked his way up from selling tickets for DC United to eventually being a general manager for an MLS club. He was in the room when David Beckham signed his MLS contract. And so the guy knows how to run a soccer club. And for that reason, I mean, I believe a team he's associated with, Napa Valley, is already in the Founders Cup. So they've got great supporters of Panther City Hellfire. They've got an established pitch, Farrington Field. And then the other great thing about Fort Worth that a lot of people don't know is, and I think it's going to be an important aspect for developing a professional club, is that they've got an established youth academy. And for the future of your club and for developing soccer talent and for engaging businesses who want to support your club want to see what you're doing as far as developing youth. They want to be in contact and support of youth. And so Fort Worth has that. And so for that reason, I think Fort Worth is a great pick. And my final pick, guys, and I saved, my favorite for the last and what I'm most connected with the last, and the team that I want to see go pro the most is my team, FC Wichita. Wichita was established in 2015, and they basically they had a development track to go pro in 5 years, and so that's coming up next year. So the big question is, does Wichita go pro in 2020? I think that Blake Shoemaker's their owner. He's a motivated owner. Blake's been a youth coach player himself in the area his whole life. He is a man who's been known to do what he says and says what he does. And that is, he had a goal set up for the club, and so far they've made it. As I mentioned with Fort Worth Vaqueros, Wichita has a massive youth academy. At one point, I think if we have 35 or 40 just boys team, and not to mention 20 girls teams. So over 50 youth academy teams, which is, again, it's important for not only for engaging the community, but engaging businesses, engaging businesses that want to support local soccer, which brings in money to your club. Well, they've got a decent, in comparison, they've got a decent online presence. Social media has been decent. Nothing in comparison to some of the other clubs, but they've been decent. The biggest thing that's happened for Wichita, which I think is going to be a huge boost for the club, and it's got a lot of big money investors interested in professional soccer in Wichita, is Stryker Soccer Complex. Wichita the city invested $22 million last year in building a soccer-specific area. It was all donated lands from a family. It's Stryker Soccer Complex, $22 million. It's all soccer-specific. There's no football lines. There's no other lines. They've got a championship pitch. They went all out. So that is a huge thing. I know at this point, without any additional stands that they can put over on the south side of the pitch, they can hold 3,500 people. So it's a fantastic opportunity for Wichita as far as having their own pitch, a really championship professional pitch. And again, Wichita, they're a proven winning club. They won the conference 3 times since 2015. And so that doesn't hurt for the fan base. It just shows how committed their club is from the front office to the supporters. They've got great supporters group as well in Wichita. And so Wichita would be my final pick for pro teams. Tim, I don't know what you're thinking.
Well, I had Fort Worth Vaqueros as well. Again, Michael Hitchcock's track record of running clubs, although he seems like the Lamar Hunt of lower league soccer. He's kind of got his finger in multiple pies. But yeah, Fort Worth is, as you said, I can't really add much to what you said. There's a solid market there, and clearly a distinctive market from Dallas as well. You've got both the solidity of the population base, but the differentiation of it being Fort Worth. And yeah, they've clearly been running well for a while, so I'm gonna kind of skip over them because you've covered them quite well there. Motown, I'd like to see them go pro because they already do run basically a professional club, and they ran and advanced into the NPSL playoffs last year. Talking of the Northeast, Boston City's another club with kind of a lot of social media presence and a lot, obviously, well-engaged ownership and a market there that could quite easily explode if it was given a professional, like, non-league club, if you will. Also, Boston City, as opposed to the Revs out in Foxborough, is a distinction. You know, they make their market kind of like Chicago City do in WPSL through being the club of the city, not of the suburbs. So that I had those down, and well, I'll briefly touch on Minneapolis City in a minute, but I had Crossfire Richmond down just because they have such a powerful history of academy development that I think they would make an interesting professional club. But yeah, Minneapolis City was my fifth one, and yeah, that's clubs that we would like to go pro. I've had enough conversations with them over the years and observed their conversations on these things. Whenever it's brought up, they bring it back to the fact that they, as a locally sourced club with, in their estimation, everyone being at the very least, an adopted Minnesotan, you can't really run that model with a professional team. So that would be, and they've even said it themselves, that would be the biggest reason they wouldn't. Ironically, the reasons that you gave, Johnny, for the success of a professional team, the depth of the academy, are exactly the reasons that would probably be a handbrake on Minneapolis City becoming a professional club. They do have a deep academy system. They have, a couple of underage teams now, and the academy systems that don't belong to them but that feed into them in the cities. But the problem is that they're looking to source locally, and as soon as you step up to pro, that becomes a bit of a challenge. I mean, there's a reason only Athletic Bilbao have ever managed to do that at any level that I can remember. And even they changed their rules so that they could hire people who were of, X, Y, Z descent. So yeah, those are my five teams.
So I had my five. Actually, I had 9 down when I sent my tweet out with my 9 teams, and then I was narrowing it down today to 5. And you guys kind of talked about a few of them, so I'm going to give you a little bit different view. I crossed out a few of my list just so I can highlight some different clubs than what we've already talked about so far. So, Asheville City's on my list first of all. In the South itself right now, it's just Chattanooga and then Miami, but I'm not sure if you count Miami as the South. I know a few Atlanta United fans might have an argument there, but Asheville City would be a geographical rival, and they already have a rivalry with Chattanooga. It's a really cool rivalry. They have a beer keg, and each team has a side of the beer keg that they decorate, and their logos are conjoined in the middle, and they each have major breweries that back their teams locally in the city, Chattanooga, and then in Asheville they have Highwire Brewing, and they have a beer bet. So I believe each brewery has to sell the other breweries beer for a week for whoever wins. And the opening year, I believe Chattanooga won 9-0 against Asheville in a crazy match. But kind of a cool rivalry. Both are avid fan bases. I know they would build off of each other. But Asheville, in their first year, they're averaging 2,000 fans a game. They even upped it the year before. They have a beautiful stadium overlooking the city. If you've ever been to Asheville, it's known for the Biltmore Mansion. And kind of near it in downtown Asheville, you have the Asheville Taurus minor league baseball stadium. And on top of the hill, on top of the minor league baseball stadium, there is a publicly owned football/soccer stadium. So the two things I have against the stadium: it's beautiful, lots of seating, awesome viewpoints, great soccer stadium, great atmosphere, but there's very little parking, and parking is owned by the city, and so is the baseball stadium. So the baseball team gets first dibs at games, and they're not allowed to play games while the minor league baseball team has games that weekend. So it's pretty difficult for scheduling, in Asheville City to have to work very hard scheduling NPSL Pro. That's probably the biggest hurdle they have to climb, but they're already a stable team, proven winners since day one out of the gate. They have a great fan base. They need to figure out parking, and the bigger issue is scheduling conflicts with the baseball team. And so I have 2 Michigan teams on my list. So Detroit City's already in. Then you have Lansing, which is a USL League One team, and I could potentially see 2 more NPSL clubs go pro in Michigan. I think Michigan is the most underrated soccer state in America right now. Um, they have a lot of bubbling teams in the lower division. So I'm going to go AFC and Arbor number one. Great fan base, very, very well run organization, fantastic merchandise, fantastic vision for their club. They're playing in a nice venue. And then Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids is a ginormous supporters group. Uh, very, very passionate fans. They're in a good market. They're kind of farther away, isolated from the other cities that are have professional clubs. So I think they would go first, and then AFC and Arbor. I had Wichita and Little Rock Rangers in Minneapolis City as well. I'm going to talk about some other clubs. I already had Fort Worth. I'm going to talk about FC Buffalo. And FC Buffalo, they're probably my most underrated team. The NPSL, they have about 6,000 followers on social media. They run a very professional club. Everything they do on social media and in game looks professional. It doesn't look anything Sunday beerly. They take they're very detail oriented in a club, and they're for a club that's verified on Twitter. Not many people bring them up in conversations, and they're hosting FC St. Pauli. We're going to talk about that later in the show. A professional club in Germany. They're bringing them over this summer for a friendly along with New York Cosmos. So I have FC Buffalo up there. I had Tulsa. That is one of my preliminary 9 teams. They have a little bit of room to grow, but they definitely have the potential to. I think one thing holding them back is they have the Roughnecks in their market space, so that kind of hurts them a little bit. But my wild card team is Syracuse FC. No one's talked about them, but Syracuse FC and NPSL, they have kind of grown a pretty rabid supporters group and a good fan base. Their stadium situation kind of sucks. Playing a high school football field, so if they get a stadium situation worked out, they have a good thing going up there in Syracuse, New York. Moving along from NPSL pro teams to the U.S. Open Cup, which a few NPSL teams are participating in this year. The round 1 pairings were announced on a Wednesday, and next Wednesday they'll announce the round 2 pairings. So they'll potential round 2 pairings between, depending on how these games go. And we're going to talk about which games interest us the most. And I had 3 that I have circled on my calendar that I'm really looking forward to. Number 1, my favorite matchup is Lansing Ignite, which I kind of mentioned earlier, USL League One team. They're hosting AFC and Arbor in the NPSL on May 8th at 7 p.m. And they're pretty close teams. They both have great fan bases. I expect a phenomenal atmosphere and 2 very, very good teams as well. And then we have the Richmond Kickers in USL League One, a former USL Championship side. They're hosting Virginia United. And the cool storyline here is the Kickers actually won the Open Cup in 1995, and they're one of the oldest teams in the tournament. They have the 8th most wins all time. And then Virginia United making their U.S. Open Cup debut. They actually beat off Cinderella Story, Christos FC, in the game to get into the Open Cup through Open Cup qualifiers. So pretty cool storyline, a very experienced Open Cup team versus a team making their debut. That's going to be fun to watch. And then there's 6 NPSL versus USL League 2 matchups. And my favorite one out of the bunch is the Erie Commodores of the NPSL hosting the Dayton Dutch Lions of USL League 2, kind of 2 storied teams and 2 teams that everyone recognizes around the country are going to be facing off in a fun matchup between the 2 powerhouse leagues. And so Johnny, what matchups are you looking forward to in the first round of the U.S. Open Cup?
Well, the first thing that I wanted to mention is I can't keep up with all these Dutch Lions teams. How do you keep up with them? There's like Cincinnati, Dayton, Houston. The Dutch Lions are all over the place. But that is an interesting matchup. I'm always excited about, and everybody else calls them USL League 2. They're still PDL to me. Mama named them PDL. I'm going to call them PDL. They're PDL to me. I'm always interested about the NPSL clubs when we play these PDL teams because one of my good buddies is a general manager for a PDL club. And he runs the Cincinnati Dutch Lions, and he constantly talks crap about the NPSL in fun. He appreciates the NPSL and watched a lot of Wichita games back in the day. But because it's almost like the NPSL was almost treated like the redheaded stepchildren to the PDL because the PDL had was included in the soccer period in the soccer pyramid, and the NPSL wasn't. So I always enjoy those NPSL and USL2 or USL League 2 matchups. I'm super excited about the New York Cosmos B. I like the Cosmos B. They won the NPSL a couple years back with a former Wichita player named Travis Pittman. So I always dig the New York Cosmos. Plus, it takes me back to my NASL days. I'm significantly older than you guys, and so I actually remember Pele playing and all that. So I still have a little bit of love for them. They're playing BlackRock FC, a USL League 2. That's going to be an interesting match on May 8th, and that's going to be played in New York. The game that has me the most excited, and I'm most excited to see because I really want to. I'm not a massive fan of the Little Rock Rangers. I respect the Little Rock Rangers. I respect their supporters and their ownership, but they're league rivals to us. But they are playing the North Texas Rayados, and I want to see Little Rock kick the crap out of the North Texas Rayados because North Texas knocked FC Wichita out of the U.S. Open Cup last year in a highly debated match. I don't know how much you want to get into that, Riley. So you can cut me off now. We can save it till next week. But there is a lot of bad blood between me and the North Texas Rayados. It'll be interesting to see the Rayados all the way through the first 3 rounds of the U.S. Open Cup hosted every game. And now here they are in the first round having to travel to Little Rock. It's going to be a test for them. The Rayados play on a nice little tiny pitch that they're accustomed to playing on. It's always best to play at home. And so we'll see what they do when they travel to Little Rock, who in essence, as you mentioned before, isn't necessarily playing at home, quote unquote, because they're going to play at the Episcopal Collegiate School in Little Rock and not at War Memorial. But yet they'll still have all their fans. Not sure how many North Texas Rayado fans will be making their way up from Texas. And then I've got 2 other interesting picks that are exciting me, and they're also both on May 8th. And that is, I love the Des Moines Menace. The first matchup FC Wichita ever had in the U.S. Open Cup was against the Des Moines Menace. Des Moines Menace was one of my honorable mentions. Would love to see them go pro. Des Moines has been around. I think they've been an established club, I think, since 1993. I can't believe they're not a pro club. They're constantly a difficult club to battle for pro teams or amateur teams. But they face Duluth FC of the NPSL, so that's going to be an interesting matchup, and that's going to take place in Des Moines, Iowa. And then the other one is one of our Lone Star Conference matchups is Midland Odessa. Midland Odessa is a super strong club in the Lone Star Conference of the NPSL, and they're facing FC Denver. FC Denver is an unaffiliated amateur club that's done fairly decent. Midland has been on and off as far as how well they do with competition outside of their conference, and so it'll be interesting to see how they do and kind of hopefully give us a little taste of maybe what we're going to see in the Lone Star Conference this year in the NPSL.
And we're going to dive deeper into these matchups in the coming weeks as we prepare for the first round of the U.S. Open Cup. But Tim, are there any matches you're looking forward to or circled in your calendar for the first weekend of the U.S. Open Cup?
Well, up here, it's kind of impossible to avoid Duluth versus Des Moines for the reasons that Johnny just laid out. And there's another
powerful club, Tim.
Yeah,
Des Moines tough, man.
What was that?
I said Des Moines they're a handful. They will be a handful for Duluth.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think Duluth have got. I don't necessarily think Duluth are going to win it, but it's going to be an interesting matchup. And Duluth are kind of becoming a little bit of a cup club. Like, they went on far in the playoffs, basically beating people that other teams thought would trash them. Managed to win the entire Midwest NPSL, and they're kind of developing into a little bit of a knockout club. But there's also Milwaukee Bavarians, 1929, I believe, founded, versus the first year USL 1 Flamingos. And I can't really, Madison Forward, to give them their proper name. They Forward Madison rather. That's a fascinating matchup to me. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing a team that in the Bavarians are basically set up to play the Amateur Cup, and they've won it a few times. And UPSL, but they put most of their eggs into the Amateur Cup basket, and they're coming up against a side that's a first year club, but is very. They've got their heads screwed on. They know their direction of travel. They're very vocal on social media, and they have their fan base already. They have Breeze Stevens Stadium, so I mean it's going to be kind of interesting to see that matchup. And the other one that I kind of noticed when I was looking through was Miami FC, the juggernaut of NPSL, coming up, and they're a Founders Club team as well. Founders Cup team, rather, playing against the Soccer Soldiers of the UPSL. I just think that's fascinating. It's going to be kind of interesting to see whether the Soldiers can even hold a candle.
Yeah, it might be a blowout, but the Barbarians are actually the oldest cup and the oldest team in the U.S. Open Cup. Excuse me, and we'll see if Ford Madison goes full Mingo on them. They actually lost 3-1 to Chattanooga in their first ever League One match. But speaking of the U.S. Open Cup, the U.S. Open Cup made a major announcement this week when they said that ESPN Plus will be streaming all U.S. Open Cup matches for rounds 1 through the final. And that is some big news because in previous years, games were on YouTube, and then after that, last year, they were on the U.S. Soccer website. So you had to find a link on Twitter, really search deeply for these links, and you weren't bringing in random audience members. People weren't just on ussoccer.com and thought, hey, there's a Open Cup match. I'm going to watch this. No, but now with ESPN Plus, they have millions of subscribers, and people are going to be on and see, hey, there's a soccer game on. I'm just going to tune in. You're going to get a lot more casuals than you're going to get on YouTube, or you're going to get U.S. Soccer. I'm going to be completely honest. At first, when this announcement was made, I was kind of mad as behind a paywall, but then I realized the amount of quality that's going to be differentiated between ESPN and now, or formerly what it was on YouTube and ussoccer.com. So now you're going to have professional broadcast. You're going to have high quality. It's going to be easy to access on a smart TV, unlike with ussoccer.com where you had to watch on a computer or a smart device. So it's going to be really easy to access this year. You're not going to have to worry about, is the stream going to be down? It's going to be high quality this year, so I'm really looking forward to that. The only downside of this is that teams and Open Cup qualifiers were not allowed to broadcast their matches, and people weren't able to find out how their teams were doing in the qualifying live. They couldn't follow the qualifying live stream, so that's going to have to get worked out. I know there's a small group of people that were very upset about that, but at the end of the day, it benefits the overall good of the soccer community to have these games broadcasted in high quality on ESPN Plus, reaching a bigger audience. And we're at the point now where we're having all the soccer you can want, all the U.S. soccer on ESPN Plus. You have MLS matches, you have all USL matches, USL League One matches. You have all the Open Cup. Now, if we get a weekly highlight game of the NPSL or the PDL on ESPN Plus, I think we're in really, really good shape on ESPN Plus side to really be the forefront runner for soccer coverage in America, really pushing that forward, because I know teams with Flow Sports and the other streaming services aren't as happy as people watching on ESPN Plus. It's really a high-quality product. It's only $5 a month, so it's a great deal. Very, very good news for U.S. Open Cup fans. There's a smart move by the U.S. Soccer Federation there. Moving on to our next topic of conversation, we kind of mentioned some stadiums earlier and what that means for teams that want to go professional, and how the stadiums are a very important aspect and the successfulness of a amateur club or a semi-professional club in that matter. But Johnny, when you're looking at a stadium, what aspects to make a stadium successful in the lower divisions?
Well, it's a great question. Wichita has just recently gone through. Man, it was a process, and I'm familiar with it because I was involved in the process in working with the city council in order to get it done. And Wichita, it was interesting because the land was all donated. It was 40 acres, and it was all donated by a family. So, Wichita didn't struggle like a lot of soccer towns do in finding a place to put the stadium. The struggle was, where does the money come from? Who pays for it? And then, the design and the parking and all those things. And I'll kind of talk about those things. And, I spoke about it, if you were listening in, when I was talking about Deet Stadium with Kingston Stockade. And for me, as a soccer fan and somebody who's traveled around to some different places in the world, and I'm sure Tim can speak to this as well, is that, in America, we're accustomed to driving everywhere we go. And by golly, if there's not a parking spot right in front of where we want to go, we're not going to go there. But in a lot of places in Europe, I mean, those cities just weren't designed for cars. And so fans do a lot of walking. And so, having a stadium in proximity to food places, to bars and stuff I think is a big consideration. Now, what we went through in developing it, and Tim, I don't know how you feel about that, but what we went through is the first thing that we went through with Wichita is that we were able to obtain star bonds in order to get the $22 million. And that's how we paid for it. It was basically sales tax revenue. And then we went and got into the design aspects. And I think when you look at a stadium, if you want to create a soccer specific stadium, there's really four things that I think are extremely important. The first thing is the design and the setup of the stadium. Is it user friendly? Is it easy to get to? Once you get to the stadium, is it easy to navigate? Is the parking easy to navigate? What Wichita has is not only do they have a championship field, but in addition, they have 9 additional youth pitches around, and each pitch has its own specific parking, which is nice for fans to get to the specific parking areas. It's great. Again, as I mentioned before, proximity to bars and food is extremely important, not only for the fan experience, but also for sponsorships. A lot of teams like to do pregame with their fans, and some teams, a lot of teams also like to do postgame. And when you have fans drinking before and fans drinking after, there needs to be, something close and within proximity for the safety of the fan is for safety of the public. So proximity to bars and food, and then seating and sound. The experience once you're at the stadium, not being sitting exactly right on top of everyone. Do you have options, pricing options, field side tables, supporter areas? Because we know that there's a difference between fans and supporters. Supporters are fans that are a little bit more rabid. They're sitting behind the pitch, or they're sitting behind the goal. They're being on drums. They're blowing off smoke. They're cursing. They're drinking. They're an important aspect. They're the heart and soul, the heartbeat of soccer support in the United States. And so we need to have a specific area for them. But you also need to create an environment that's family friendly for other fans that maybe have little kids and stuff. So, the seating is important. Sound is important. Engaging fans through your sound system, not overplaying the natural sounds of the game that take place, but kind of complementing those things. And so those are kind of the 4 or 5 things that I think are extremely important. And those are the things that we put into the thought process when we were revamping Stryker Soccer Complex. And I would like to invite both of you guys out. If you're ever in the Wichita area, would love to have you guys come out and check out and really anyone, if you're listening to this podcast, just hit me up, Johnny Freedom 73. If you're ever in the area, I would love to take you out and show you our soccer specific stadium that we have in Wichita.
Yeah, man. Hopefully we meet you guys in the playoffs and can check out that stadium. But I'm kind of feeding off of what you were saying about location. I think location is the most important aspect of anything. And being in a downtown area is very important, being near local bars, restaurants, kind of the vibe of the city. But if that's not possible, I think a very important thing is to be near a road or be accessible. I know with the Atlanta Silverbacks locally, to me, one of the hardest things is finding the stadium. You can see it kind of off the expressway. Most people just think it's a youth stadium, but actually getting there, going through lots of trees, driving back through looks like a toll booth, and then farther back into this long winding parking lot. It's hard to find the stadium, and I think near the road where you have easy public access and it's easy to find the stadium and people can drive by and see something going on is very helpful for your club. And then functionality, I think, is the second most important aspect of having an appropriate playing surface. And I think it really looks more professional not playing on football lines, playing on a field that's adequate in length and width to the semi-professional and adult playing surface, because playing on high school football fields, while some may work, it does hurts in the terms of looking professional. I know a lot of people when they say, "Hey, you get some professional soccer team. That's awesome. Where do they play?" And you say the local high school. That's kind of a turnoff for a lot of people. So, moving out of those venues to venues that look more professional are help. I know also when we're talking about stadiums, you have to put them in two categories, because teams that are their goal is to develop players are on one side, and all they're focused on is quality of pitch. So they're going to play. A lot of those teams have youth organizations, and they're just playing on their own youth fields, and that's awesome. That's great for them. But for the teams that really want to set themselves apart and create a community behind their club and create a professional environment and a fun environment, looking at these next steps of seeding and uh, stuff like that is very helpful. And then the kind of charisma and the game day atmosphere. So having spaces where you can have beer, sell alcohol, have food trucks, easy parking, stuff like that really help a game day atmosphere. And I think a thing, excuse me, that makes or breaks a team is the ability to sell alcohol. So if you're playing at a public venue and you don't have a beer permit to sell alcohol from the city, that's a huge thing. A lot of fans, that that makes or breaks them coming to the game or not. And I think it's a proven statistic. You look across the lower leagues, and teams that sell alcohol have larger attendance than teams that don't, and teams that used to sell alcohol that now they don't. Their attendance is going downhill. So I think alcohol is a very important variable in the equation of having a successful attendance and a successful game day atmosphere.
Well, what we've done in Wichita is that was a struggle for Wichita this past season. As Striker was getting developed, we've been at Striker since 2015, and this was our last season, was our first year that we didn't play at Striker because we were going through this development phase over at Striker Soccer Complex. So we were at a Christian high school, which absolutely you're not going to be selling alcohol there. We couldn't even have alcohol on the premises. So not only could you not have any pregame stuff going on with the supporters, I mean, and then there was no alcohol during the fields. And I agree with you 100%, Riley. It absolutely impacted the supporters, and I think it impacted the amount of money that came into the club. The only issue that we've had with alcohol sales, even when we were at Striker, was the liquor laws in the state of Kansas were so antiquated that we had to have a certain amount of law enforcement personnel present. I mean, not security, law enforcement personnel, actual off-duty police officers at the stadium if you're selling alcohol. And we had to have so many of them there. We sold just enough alcohol to break even with what we had to pay with the police officers. And I'm not bagging on the police officers. I'm bagging on the antiquated alcohol liquor laws in the state of Kansas. To be honest with you, I don't know what's going to happen at Striker. I don't know if Blake and the ownership group has decided to sell alcohol this last season. But what I do know is that alcohol is allowed in the parking lot. And so I know they will be having a lot of the supporters are already planning whether or not there's alcohol sold in the stadium. They will be pre-gaming, half-timing, and post-gaming. In addition, the ownership has got a sponsorship deal in the works to where they're going to be doing pre-game events at a local sports bar where fans can drink. The team will send over a bus, pick them up, take them to the game. They can enjoy the game, and they can enjoy a ride back if they've had 1 or 2 or 12, in my case, alcoholic drinks before, during, and after the game.
See, that is awesome right there. I think Asheville, of all cities, should really incorporate the busing of uh, fans from the stadium to the bars because A, there's 14 million bars in downtown Asheville if you've never been there, and B, there's no parking, and C, because they have pub crawl buses where people get on them and they pretend to pedal and go around the city and have a good time. And I think if they could incorporate those tiny little pub crawl buses, that'd make for a fun, unique atmosphere. And I've been trying to get Tim to get the ownership group in Asheville to incorporate that. But also, you saw Greenville FC and the NPSL Southeastern Conference that they're moving to a new stadium, and they have a USL League One team. Come on, we talked about this in the first episode, but a big part of this battle in the soccer wars of is Greenville FC's attendance going to be affected is the fact that they might not be able to sell alcohol at the city's football field this coming season. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And Tim, is there anything that you want to add to the discussion about what makes a good lower division soccer stadium?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, and I'm not bagging on Moorhead, Minnesota. I live here. I love this city, but Dakota Fusion are on the wrong side of the river in the wrong state at a high school stadium. And not only the wrong state for it being Dakota Fusion, but also the wrong state in terms of most of the downtown infrastructure. Downtown Moorhead doesn't really exist. So they could do with busing people from downtown Fargo, where it does exist and it's vibrant and full of hipsters, to the game. So that would be a good idea. And that busing idea is a really good idea, and they already do it for other things, but not yet for Fusion. But I would say, yeah, I mean, most of the ideas you've said so far I've written down and kind of in agreement with. There's also a big college, D3 college stadium in Moorhead here that would be better suited for the kind of scale that you're talking about, because again, high school fields don't exactly appeal to people to the casual observer of a game. It's like, you want to go and watch a game? Oh yeah, go down to the local high school stadium. There's a couple of soccer complexes in Fargo Moorhead, but there's no actual like stadium field. So that's a weird disconnect as well. There's stadiums without youth complexes and youth complexes without stadiums. And so that could do with getting sorted out. But I absolutely agree with you that high school fields with them morass of different lines and their gridiron logos in the end zone and all that stuff is just, not ideal.
And a quick shout out to the WPSL. We're going to be talking about this later in future episodes, but their championship game this season is in the absolutely gorgeous new Oklahoma State Soccer Pacific Stadium. And if you've not looked at it, I think it's 5,000 capacity, but they can fill a lot more in there. And they have the European awning coming out. They have multiple levels to the stadium. The pitch is immaculate. It is absolutely beautiful. And that's what the championship game is going to be, along with the international combine for WPSL teams to send their players to a week-long combine. The international coaches come to sign these girls to play professional soccer. So a very, very cool stadium there. And I believe Oklahoma City is going to be playing in WPSL at that stadium. I'm not 100% sure, but keep an eye out for that. It's a beautiful stadium. If you've not seen it already, go look it up on Google. We'll probably tweet out a photo as well on the Roots Up Twitter account.
Sorry, the one thing I didn't get around to saying in terms of the stadium, network infrastructure is kind of important. If you get stuck in a stadium where there's no decent Wi-Fi, let alone any hardline network, it kind of makes a big difference to everyone's experience of it, whether they're a fan or a broadcaster or the club. I just wanted to say that. But anyway, don't know whether you can fit that in. But
I can
anyway,
add
sorry.
that, Tim. I mean, as a traveling broadcaster who travels with a club and broadcasts in a variety of different stadiums, I travel regularly with a MiFi, and depending on how good the service for my MiFi is in that particular town depends on whether or not the fans in Wichita get a jittery broadcast or something smooth and catch everything that I say. So like hardline Wi-Fi, like what you're talking about, is so important, Tim. All that built into the stadium wherever we're calling games from is absolutely crucial. You hit the nail on the head. I think it's very important.
Yeah, it's no fun when your tweets send 45 minutes after the game ends and people are like, "Oh wow, we just scored 5 goals in 3 minutes." No, my
Yeah,
internet.
I've had some black hole situations as the social media coordinator for the Fusion. I've had some black hole situations where the club have been on the road and I've been trying to get score updates from like Chicago, and it is a good example. Some of those fields just didn't have any coverage, and the other clubs not covering stuff. And so you're kind of scrambling and texting people and seeing if anyone's got any connection at all. I've had updates from players' families before quicker than the clubs got back to me.
Muskin Risers joined NPSL for the 2020 season. They're announcing their expansion a little early, but the Muskin Risers have been a team since 2014. They've been playing in a mixture of outdoor and indoor leagues. They've played more noticeably in the PSAL or the PASL, excuse me, and then MASL League 2. And Johnny, I know you're very knowledgeable when it comes to indoor soccer, but the Muskin Risers, they have accumulated a very large fan base for their outdoor and indoor games, and I think it's a great addition to the Great Lakes Conference. Kind of add some depth from Detroit City, Grand Rapids, AFC Ann Arbor, and they lost Lansing to the PDL, now USL League 2, so it kind of adds that extra team outside of Michigan to boost the conference into one of the deeper conferences in the league.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly for a number of different reasons. First of all, Michigan, as you mentioned before, Ann Arbor was one of my honorable mention teams because I agree with you. I think Michigan is absolutely a lot of times not even the picture and should be in the picture when it comes to soccer states, especially considering what Detroit's done.
Absolutely.
So that in itself, the indoor-outdoor connection, and I don't want to, man, and I know there are a lot of people that get really snobby about indoor soccer. And I'm talking to you, people that don't think indoor soccer is soccer. Coming from, I have foreign parents who took me to NASL games in the 70s and early 80s. And I got to see, Franz Beckenbauer, Pele, Georgie Best, and those types of players play in the NASL and watch the NASL dissolve. And all we had in the middle 80s and the end of the 80s was indoor soccer. And soccer got developed in Wichita because of indoor soccer. I have a love for it. But when you're talking about, Riley, when you're talking about running an amateur soccer club in a grassroots area, think about what you can do to develop, because ultimately what happens every summer for teams like FC Wichita and the Athletics and Little Rock and Duluth and all these clubs that only operate in the summer is it's a constant rebuild. And we have to go out, we have to grab new players, and we have to reinvigorate the community to the club. And it's like starting over and over and over again. If you can get a club and you can develop a club with indoor and outdoor players. And I say that because Wichita is packed full of indoor players. Frank Teyu leading the MASL right now, League One in goals right now. His brother Uzi plays on the same team. Huge indoor player. Matt Clare, huge indoor player. Gordy Gerson, who played with us a couple years ago, huge indoor player. We just signed We just signed. Oh my gosh, I'm totally brain farting right now. But we have all kinds of indoor players playing in Wichita, and so let's think about that when you're about the operation of an indoor club and an outdoor club. You have an indoor season that runs over through the winter months, and then you have an NPL season that runs through the summer months. So you have these guys. You can keep these players in your community year round. You can literally keep them in your community year round. And if you have that same club, name the club the same, they play indoor in the winter, they play outdoor in the summer. What a great the situation they have here, because you have players staying in your community. You have players consistently recognized by the fans. And honestly, the players can earn a living. They can make money playing indoor soccer because it doesn't impact their amateur status, because a U.S. Soccer Federation doesn't recognize indoor soccer players even if they're paid as professional soccer players. So it doesn't impact amateur status of any amateur players, any college players that you might have playing for you, and you keep consistent faces in your community. They can make money in the wintertime playing soccer, and for the rest of the year, they can be a member of your community, either having a job or working in private coaching. So, I mean, I think the indoor-outdoor soccer for an amateur club, an NPSL club, heck, even an NPSL pro club or NPSL 1, whatever they end up calling it, it's a great combination because it gives your fans year-around soccer.
Yeah, that's a great point. Roster retention is very important, and they bring a good fan base as well, so it's going to be very exciting on a bunch of different levels. But I'm going to spring a kind of last-minute topic on you guys. But Wake FC of USL League 2 announced their logo. I don't know if you guys seen it, but I'm going to kind of explain the logo to you over the air. But it's a roundel, so Kaiser and John, you guys automatically will like it. And it has their first circle on the outside. It's kind of a skinny gray circle. And then in the middle, they have not necessarily another circle, but they have a W and an F and a C all kind of combined together, conjoined together in one, and a semicircular formation inside the original circle. My one thing I don't like how skinny the gray part is.
Riley, can I interrupt you for a second? I want to Google this because I can't handle you just explaining this and me not being able to see this. What's the name of the club again? I'm Googling this right now.
Yeah, I've got this now. Yeah,
and it's retweeted on the Roots Up Twitter account. It's one of the most recent retweets, so you can go there as well.
What is the team name?
Wake FC.
Okay.
Yeah, I just found it. It kind of looks a little bit Glasgow Rangers to me, if I'm honest.
It does. And the one takeaway, and I know you guys are going to harp on this, I don't like the fact that they put football club spelled Futbol on their American soccer logo.
That's kind of, there's no accent on there either, so that's like fusion. It's football club, not football. Anyway, yeah, I don't get that either. I don't know why they couldn't just put FC, if I'm honest, but also, I don't like the order the letters are layered there. It looks, the W does not look like it looks like it's been swallowed.
Yeah, it's weird all around. I don't even know where to begin with it. It almost has a little bit, I mean, I don't know, Tim, if you're seeing this as well. I see the Glasgow Rangers only because of the color, but I'm kind of getting that that almost like that Inter Milan kind of feel with all the letters all formed together.
Oh yeah, that's a good call.
See that a little bit?
Yeah, the Glasgow Rangers thing is they have RFC, I believe, like basically interlocked on top of each other, kind of like that. But yeah, I don't get that. There's too much going on in a small space.
Now we got to be careful now, because if Wake FC resembles Inter Milan, they might get sued. So
yeah, no kidding. That was a bizarre story, wasn't it?
They need to talk to our boy David Beckham, who's actually friends with my wife. on Facebook. Mrs. Freedom loves to mention her friend David Beckham all the time, but I think she's only friends with him because she likes when he looks in underwear.
Hey,
But
one of my
on the
one of
pod.
my old one of my old bosses actually lived in the village where he has his house in like the suburbs of London. And so every time Beckham was there, the whole village had to be kind of cordoned off.
Really?
Yeah, no kidding. And he got turn up late for work and go, yeah, David Beckham was at home. Place is called Sawbridgeworth.
Never
Be
heard of
the
it.
only person that does not have a connection to David Beckham on this podcast.
Yeah, not claiming any kind of status, just a funny little story.
Well, it's an interesting, I suppose, roundel. It wouldn't be in my top 5, Riley.
Oh, definitely not mine either. Once again, we are at the 1 hour mark on the Roots Up podcast. And thank you guys for listening all the way through on a very entertaining episode. We'll be back at you next week. And then coming up, we also have the Green Bay Voyagers of USL League 2 highlight episode that will be posted very soon after this one hits iTunes and Speaker.com. Make sure you're following us at Roots Up Pod on Twitter. Make sure you're following myself at Riley Miletsky, and then at Johnny Freedom 73 and at Tim Reporting as well. So make sure you're following all three of us. Hopefully we'll have Kaiser back next week as well on our weekly podcast. But signing off today, thank you guys for listening once again. Goodbye.